Now, these are going to be 2-minute. This is the hard part. You're really forcing you to take and literally think in a different way. But you will find that in the end, it really pays dividends. And when this afternoon, after the model is left, we're going to set up my computer, and I'll show you examples of other artists from the Renaissance, not distant future, I mean, not that far back, that taking in, this is the way they work. Whether you're talking about even working in the studios or doing storyboards and stuff, it's the way it works. It's the way it's done. And so this is very different from what I'm teaching you is professional. And that is very different from, I'm not teaching you art school drawing. I'm teaching you the way you actually do things. And it's a major difference. All the other stuff that you do, yeah, it's useful. You're studying, in other words, if you're doing very careful, long pose studies, that has its point. You're studying values, you're getting a certain amount of skill. But in terms of if you're outside of school, it's useless. I hate to say that, but you don't work that way. But it's training, yes. You're training yourself. I've done that. I don't do anything, I don't teach anything that I haven't myself done. Okay. So here, I'll do another.
So your finger is actually laying on the paper?
My fingers are right on the paper. I can push really hard on the paper without putting any marks on the paper. And if you're worried about something smearing, then you can put another piece of paper under it. Okay. So now, I go through. Now, in this case, as I'm doing this, I say, okay, he's got the hand up there. Well, I'll just place where that hand's going to be. So I don't ignore what I'm looking at, but I'm not copying. I'm trying to feel the action that's going through. Come through. And the other leg behind. Now, I'm doing these things in sequence. So I'm going literally sort of like step 1, step 2. Okay, so now from here, now I'll go back in. And as I mentioned earlier, that often you will find that as we develop our skill, that we do a lot of different things simultaneously. Now I need to try to feel that the hip is high on the other side. So as I'm doing this ellipse, we're taking and going over that surface of the form. Coming through. Cross, going over. Through. Get the idea? Okay. Don't be surprised if you find it a little more difficult than it looks. Okay? So I work very hard at trying to make it look really easy. Okay. Okay, go for it. Now, you want to feel that the rib cage and all this stuff is really pushing out. So I want to lead the eye over there. And the pelvis is shifted. So I would use that already. So the axis across this is already telling you that we've got a shift going here. So then as I take and pull from that, I can come through and I find the basic sort of flow of form. You can feel these forms coming down. And we're going in, so I'm pushing in. Feel high, low, going through. Arm going down. See, I'm trying to feel where this thing is going. Now, another part of this, as I'm doing the drawing, I don't ignore the model in the sense that when I'm drawing, I'm constantly checking where things are. I'm looking, trying to understand, see where the forms are. So it's a combination of going over, around. So this is the starting point. If you've ever seen any of the drawings by Tintoretto, you would recognize that what I'm doing is very, very, very similar. Okay, you're just getting the action. You're just getting the action. Then this is something we would build on. See, I could take this now, and this is something where we will be focusing on later on, is being able to build these forms then. Then I'm just taking and containing these volumes. So now when I start to build.
I noticed you don't use, it's all curvature. Do you save your straight lines for the end, or do you just not use them at all?
No straight.
No straight?
Later on, we'll get there.
Okay.
This is a difference in the thinking process now. One of the criticisms I make a lot of, not to criticize, but to draw a distinction. Okay, when you're drawing from a model, often what we do, now this is what I'm saying, what I'm going to do now is what I don't want you to do. Okay, and not that it's not, there's nothing wrong about it, just a different thing. So in other words, that type of stuff. Okay. Now this is this what I refer to as basically a graphic thing. This is very two-dimensional. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So now you could start from that way, but what I do from that, see the difference now. Contrast right away. We take. See, now when I'm approaching here, I was looking more at the 2D shape of something. Now from here, I'm not looking at the shape, I'm looking at the feeling of how we feel this thing coming out. See, I would take and raise that arm and feel same kind of considerations, but how I organize the lines. See, I'm taking and leading the eye through the drawing as we're taking and doing it. That has a very different feeling between those things. And yet, it's we're doing the same thing. So, as we're taking, got the arm, even here I would pick up the flow. Now, the question was, okay, these are a lot of curved lines. Okay, in that sense, we could take and use an example of okay, how I was taught. One of the things, the point, because as a student, I remember an instructor talking about we were talking about kinetics. Okay, and he says, well, pretend. Maybe I should be doing this up on the board there. One of the things when we started, I mentioned that it should never be a question of what you're doing, how you're doing it, or why. Okay, now the question was, well, I use so many of these curved lines. Okay, now sort of backing up a little bit in terms of interpretation and explaining this. If I start out here, okay, and this is the way it was explained to me. And with the instructor was talking about Renaissance system of movement and how you make the eye. In more modern terms, we call it but we call it arabesque. Okay, so pretend like your eye is like a pinball machine. So, starting out, here's the pinball. Your eyeball. You're shooting this marble. Okay. Now, in a pinball machine, you direct that marble by using paddles. So if I take and do this, that's going to bounce off of that thing. Then I'm going to catch it. And we could take, no matter how you do it, I can keep creating situations where I'm directing the eye. That's the idea. I'm directing the eye with how you catch the line. So these curved lines now doesn't have to be curved all the time. I mean, pinball machine things are straight; they're not necessarily curved. Okay, but the idea, in other words, if I take and do this. Same movement, but that's different now than taking and doing chaos. There's no movement. Okay, so I'm very purposefully, the experience that you get when you look at the drawings, this is really what you're always doing. You're creating an experience. So it's the lines that you put down that create that experience. So, but I'm also using that as a means of taking and understanding what it is that you're drawing. In other words, when I'm going through the figure, I'm saying, okay, I'm starting out, say, with the neck here. And I want to feel that the rib cage is pushing out on this side. I will come in and direct the eye over there. And then we've got the pelvis, say the pelvis is going up. Well, I'm going to move lines that are going to take and carry you over to that point. Okay. Now this is different than taking and drawing, where you're taking and doing this. That's a flat graphics too. There's no movement in it. Okay, so there as you're doing the drawing this way, you're literally copying what's in front of you. Okay. Now we're not copying, we're analyzing, trying to understand what's going on. So as I'm doing the drawing here, so then as I say, well, okay, we got the pelvis is shifting up, so I'm going over the surface. Well, the axis of that ellipse is telling us. So I'm making the eye see one side to the other. So as I'm going up here, I'm going to take and I'm going over that surface the same way we take and you go over the head to show something. So as we're coming through, so the lines, you're coming through, going over, going back. I'm leading the eye in its most fundamental terms. What you're talking about is you're composing a picture. It's composition. You're composing the lines to create an experience. And so this is I've shifted the focus in what you're doing in the drawing. And so that's, once I've grabbed you, okay, then we can take and go from there, okay? But this is the changing the context of how you go about doing it. And that's the critical part. Changing the context of what you perceive of how you take and do it. And this is why, for me, teaching this way, this is not easy. Not an easy way to teach, okay? But it's the most productive way, I find, in terms of taking and actually getting someplace, what you're going to really need to do. Let me explain to you how I actually got involved and how I started teaching. Okay. I quit 6 months before graduation. I went to Art Center College of Design centuries ago. Okay, literally half a century, more than half a century ago. Okay, so I had a full scholarship out of high school. I wasn't ready to work though, so I went in the Navy for a couple of years and then came back. I was too young, you know. Girls are more interesting, yeah. So anyway, I went through school. I quit 6 months before graduation because I didn't think I was learning fast enough. And I'd already been teaching Saturday class for high school students and stuff. So I was still doing that. But 6 months later, the school hired me back to teach full time. And in the meantime, I had lived in storefronts, I drove cabs, I worked in a chemistry lab, I was chief urine carrier, did all that stuff, okay? I wouldn't work more than 20 hours a week to make a living. The rest of the time, draw, paint. Okay, so as I did this, when I got hired then to start teaching, I was like 23 years old. I'd already been teaching high school kids on Saturdays. So in doing that then, I walked into the director's office and he says, well, I said, what'd you have in mind? He said, you're the teacher. And at that point I realized, okay, I'm in trouble. Okay, because most of the students were older than I was. They were all the best people in the country. Okay, so I went to my teacher. I said, what do I do? He said, well, teach. You were in class, teach. Everybody told me the same thing. And I really realized that, okay, this is serious. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Okay? So what I started doing was taking and making a list. What's number one? What's number two? What's number three? In terms of what are the most important things that you're doing it. That's what I teach. Now, the list has changed. Every artist has a list in a way. The difference between myself and another instructor is how we shuffle the list. That's really what we're dealing with. And so, in fact, one instructor gave me some good advice. She told me a mistake that she made. She said, her first class, she talked for 8 hours straight. At the end of that, she dawned on her, told them everything she knew. At the end of that, she says, dawned on her, what am I doing next week? Okay, so, but anyway, so I have, over the years, I've changed how, I've shuffled my list. I've kept, in a sense, I've kept going farther back. What's more important? What's more important? What's more important? So now I've sort of synthesized this down to the mechanics and how the mechanics take and relate to the presentation, your own thinking. How do you use the mechanics to create pictures? Picture making, that's what we do. And you'll find that what we're dealing with here now applies to anything, literally anything. So the mechanics here then, pretend like your eye is a pinball. You have to grab the eye. So as I'm coming through and I'm drawing this, I'm taking and I'm feeling the neck, pulling, then I'm taking and thinking about, this is what's sticking out. I got to capture that. I got to make you go over there. I'm composing the lines in to create the feeling of what it is I see. Now, as we started working with the chamois, doing exactly the same thing, but I was doing it much more, instead of with line, I was feeling it with mass. Same thing. I could do it with wash, doesn't matter. It doesn't take one line. After this, before we quit, I want to take and show you examples of different artists and how they took and approached this. And modern people, the Renaissance people, doing precisely what I'm talking about. So that you can see the context of where I'm coming from in my teaching. And it's really traditional. And I found how I came about more or less my own way of doing this was through taking and designing my own paintings. I took and when I started designing, I would sit down and the first thing I do when I was that 6 months, and I did this for years actually, when I left school, I would take and first thing in the morning, grab a cup of coffee, and I would draw from the old masters. And not from their drawings, but I would draw from the paintings with the idea of analyzing how they made the paintings. And it actually, once you start doing this, you realize that how you're trying to analyze, compose, how they used rhythm, how they did things, that's what you're getting. It's the thinking process that you were talking about. So this is way, way, way beyond just the simple mechanics of copying something. It's the way you actually function on your own when you're trying to understand something. That's what we're dealing with.